The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on measuring the benefits from asset management. My name is Savannah Beckowski, and I work at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. We have a great presentation lined up for you, but there are first a few logistical and housekeeping items that we need to cover. First, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, just type it into the GoToWebinar question box at any time throughout the session. All questions will be reserved for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We will be posting the presentation slides and a video recording to our website. You can reach that website at www.efcnetwork.org. All of our webinars can be found under the Past Events tab. We will be posting the presentation slides and recording as soon as we can get to it after this broadcast. A follow-up email will include a link to all of these materials. We do not submit our webinars to licensing agencies for pre-approval of continuing education credits. We do provide certificates of attendance as a courtesy. If you have joined this webinar with the intention of using it to support CEU hours, please know that we can only supply certificates of attendance after verifying your attendance. This can take up to 1 to 2 weeks to send out their certificates, and you must attend the entire webinar to receive this one. Again, we cannot guarantee that this webinar will meet the requirements for specific CEU or license renewal needs. If you have any questions about this, please email us at smallsystems@syr.edu. And for a little bit about us, the Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. We work together to create solutions to the difficult how-to-pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Heather Himmelberger, Director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center at the University of New Mexico. Heather, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And welcome everybody to today's webinar on measuring the benefits from asset management. And good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're located in the country, and I'm glad you're all able to make it today. So a very quick refresher on asset management before we get going on the benefits. It starts with identifying and inventorying the assets that you have. So looking at how many, what type, location, condition, useful life remaining, replacement cost, and any other helpful attributes that you may have that you may want to collect, such as the type of material or manufacturer, supplier, anything like that. And that part we call the current state of the assets. The next part is understanding what you want your assets to do. How well your assets are, how well are your assets doing that? Are you meeting your customer expectations? And we call this the level of service. It's where you start to set goals to see what you want to accomplish and measure to see how well you've accomplished that. Next, we want to determine which assets are critical to sustained operation. So we want to know what the likelihood is that an asset will fail and what the consequences are if that actually. And we need to remember that the entire life of the asset includes when you're first contemplating it, designing it, constructing it, all the way through its eventual removal or being taken out of service. We want to think about when the best time to intervene in the asset's life is, what interventions are possible, and what's the most efficient way to do that. And by interventions, I mean operation and maintenance type tasks, repairs, replacement, rehabilitation. So what kinds of things are we going to do in the life of the asset to try to prolong its life, try to increase the amount of time that that asset is actually doing its job, and decrease the time that it's out of service? That step is called life cycle costing. The next part is ensuring long-term funding for sustainability. So thinking about how much money you need to run the system on a day-to-day basis and where the money is going to come from. So we need to think about, how our customers are going to pay rates, what rates are going to be charged, and then sometimes there's outside funding, grants or loans that we can get to pay for capital projects. This part is called long-term funding. So those 5 core components make up the asset management program and make up the whole that we're trying to achieve. It's important to remember that asset management is a thought process, not a computer program. We're going to use digital tools to help us in whatever way works best for you, and that might be a cell phone, an iPad, a computer, a digital camera, a GPS device, any kind of digital tool can be helpful. You don't have to have super sophisticated ones, especially if you're a small system. But it is helpful to have some kind of technology. Even a simple computer, a low-end computer can do a lot of good things for you to save data in a spreadsheet or a Word document or save pictures of your assets, things of that nature. So it is important to have some digital tools, but you can keep it manageable to the size utility that you have. And we also want to remember that asset management is a journey, not a destination. So it isn't a place we're trying to get to. There's not some light at the end of the rainbow that says, okay, now we have achieved asset management, all is great, we don't have to think about it anymore. It's really just about the journey. Since we're going to be running these utilities from now until, pretty much, hundreds of years from now, as long as the community is there, your water and wastewater will be there. It's about the journey. So it's about how you run that utility. It's not some place you're trying to get to. Doing an asset management program will require some input of resources, some amount of time, some amount of money, and then, as we mentioned before, some type of technology, whatever is appropriate for your size system. So because it does require some input of resources, you might ask yourself, why would we want to do it? Well, the reason we want to do it is because we want benefits. We want the benefits of doing this kind of program, this type of strategic thinking, and making the changes that an asset management program leads you to. We want to do that because we want the benefits. Who would we want to benefit from a program? Well, I think there's 3 distinct groups that we want to have benefit. The first is your customers. You don't exist as a water or wastewater utility without customers. You have to, you have to think of them first. You're serving them, you're serving their needs. So it's very important that they get benefits out of it. If you're doing a whole program and your customers don't benefit at all, something's probably not correct, because your customers really should see benefits of one type or another. Another group that should benefit is whoever your elected leaders, governing body, or owners, and different utilities have different kinds of people that sit at the top who make those ultimate decisions about the budget, about replacements, all of those overarching decisions. So whatever group of people that is for you, they would want to benefit. Again, these are the folks that are in charge. They want to see benefits from the investments they're making. So if you're investing your time, your money, your effort into an asset management program, they want to know that there's actually a reason to do that there's actually a positive benefit. So they want to benefit. And then finally, we want to remember the employees. The employees, and I'm talking about all the employees, from whoever the most senior person is to whoever the most junior person is, whether they're in the field or in the office, whatever their job is, and however many employees that is, we want them to benefit as well. Asset management is really about the employees too, so sometimes they're sort of forgotten and it looks like it's just about, say, elected leaders and customers, but we want the employees' life to improve. We want them to have benefits as well. So we want to consider all 3 of these groups when we're thinking about having benefits from asset management. So now that we know who we want to benefit, what kind of benefits might we want? One type of benefit we would want is financial, so some kind of money benefit. Another is environmental, and the last one is social. And we call these the triple bottom line. So if you ever hear the terminology triple bottom line, You're talking about financial, environmental, social. And we're going to go through each of these so you have a little bit more understanding of what goes into each of these categories. So the first one is financial. So what do financial benefits look like? I have divided it up into 3 categories, and you might come up with some other categories, and they're not so distinct. There can be overlap between the categories, but for ease of understanding, we're going to look at these 3 categories today. So the first one is cost savings. In this case, we're still going to do an activity, but we're going to do it in a way that's less expensive. So we have a money savings from making a change in what we're doing today to what we decide to do tomorrow. This might be a savings that occurs right away in the short term, or it might be something that you don't see until over the long term. So as an example, you might decide to change the lubricant to a more expensive lubricant that has better wear properties that last longer. So you need fewer lubrication changes overall. So initially, my first change of lubrication might cost me a little more because I'm paying for a more expensive lubricant. But after that, when I don't have to do it, say, twice a year, I only have to do it once every 2 years, it will save me money. So maybe I don't see the cost savings right away, but I'll see the cost savings over the long term. And there's a couple of other examples up there as well, such as improving the energy efficiency so that we're having a lower energy bill. On the cost avoidance side, this is just a slightly different way to look at things. This is a case where we're not having to do the activity at all. So we change something so that we don't have to do something else. So we avoid the cost. So that's not a savings per se, because we're not reducing the cost, we're avoiding having to pay the cost. So maybe just a little terminology difference there. So for example, making an adjustment to how pipes are replaced or handled so that we're reducing the overall number of breaks. So the breaks that don't happen don't have to be fixed because they never happened, we avoided those costs. Or taking some kind of action or set of actions that means that a capital project doesn't have to be done. So for example, if we reduce our use or cut back on real water loss so that we don't need a new source, we can avoid the cost of actually putting in that new source. Another potential benefit is revenue benefits. So this is anything we can do to increase the revenue to our facility. And since we need money, anytime we can get revenue, that's going to help us. So it might be something like repairing or replacing water meters so that they're reading correctly, or maybe better fitting the water meters to the installation so that it's reading all the water that flows through. Because if you put a water meter in place that's not for that type of flow condition, it may not read all the flow through it, and you may not get all the benefits, or all the revenue, I'm sorry. So what do environmental benefits look like? The categories I've selected here are regulatory, resources, and waste. So taking actions that increase regulatory compliance or decrease non-compliance, maybe going beyond compliance requirements. So some examples are, maybe the requirement for arsenic is 10 micrograms per liter, but you decide to change your process to go to 5 micrograms per liter. You decide to remove a secondary contaminant because the customers would like you to remove that, such as maybe iron, but you're not strictly required to do so. You're kind of going beyond the regulatory, or maybe you improve your disinfection process so you don't have total coliform or E. coli violations. On the resource side, it's things that you can do to improve the overall use of resources, particularly those related to water and energy, but it can be other resources as well. So it might be things like, again, going back to our lubrication example, if we use fewer lubricants by reducing the number of changes that have to take place, we are creating, or we're not using as much of that lubrication resource. So those raw materials that went into creating lubrication, we're not using it because we're not needing to make as many changes. Or we reduce our carbon footprint by switching to a renewable energy form rather than a carbon-based energy form. On the waste side, we might be reducing the amount or type of waste product produced, such as changing our water or wastewater treatment process so that we're creating either less of a waste byproduct or maybe a different byproduct that maybe is less harmful. We might reduce our water leaks so that we're having less water that's chlorinated reach streams that would have an impact on fish and wildlife. So it can be anything related to waste issues. And then finally, on social benefits, we go back to those three groups we talked about before: our customers, our elected leaders, our employees. And social benefits are things that affect people. So we can look at the different groups and the types of things that might happen to help each of those groups, like our customers. So we might change policies and procedures so that we reduce the number of customer complaints, either overall or a particular type of complaint. So we might want to address something like low pressure or poor taste or odors, whatever it might be. We can make changes to try to address those types of issues, or fewer service disruptions by working to improve our isolation valves so fewer customers need to be shut off during any kind of repair. For our elected leaders, decision makers, owners, those types of folks, things like providing better justification for projects so that their confidence in why you're requesting funding and their ability to make or approve those requests can really help. Even having a better understanding overall of the water and wastewater process can be really helpful to make them more supportive of the utility. It's something that I've noticed a lot as I travel around the country, that there are a lot of utilities where, excuse me, where the elected leaders have never seen the facilities, don't know what they look like, don't understand the complexity, and they're trying to make decisions about, you know, huge funding projects or a budget, an overall budget, without really understanding what's going on. So asset management can help try to bring more understanding to those folks, which hopefully in turn helps with budgeting in the future. And then finally, our employees. And again, we don't want our employees to be a forgotten part of asset management. We want them to benefit. So things like more planned, less reactive work, so you can improve your ability to plan for the day rather than running crisis to crisis, reducing safety incidences, increasing the ability to affect your overall work, opportunities for career advancement. Those types of things can fall under that employee category. And I have only brought up very, very few examples on each of these. There are many, many more, but just to kind of give you a flavor of the types of benefits we're talking about. So how does asset management lead to benefits? Well, let's go back to the idea that asset management is a thought process. It really helps to encourage you to ask questions. Don't stick to, we've always done it this way, so this is the way we should do it. Ask questions. Why do we do it this way? Why do we do this at this time schedule? Is there any data that backs up why we do what we do and how we do it? And if not, try to collect that data and analyze it so you can make different choices. So you can ask yourself a question, you know, again, going back to our lubrication example, like, oh, we lubricate the pumps once a year. Well, why do we do that? If the only answer is because that's the way we've always done it, that's not really a good answer. You can go back and get some information, like maybe you do an oil analysis to find out that either you're not doing it soon enough or you're doing it too soon. You know, you can analyze your data to see how well you're doing. You can also set level service goals and measure against them. So setting level service goals can help you figure out how much resource to put into particular areas in your utility. So you might be spending too much in one area or not enough, because you don't need to necessarily go way above your goals unless it's a regulatory issue. So they can help you decide, like say you're going to replace a mile of pipe a year, and that's a goal that you've set. Maybe that is not the right goal. Or if you decide to replace 2 miles of pipe instead of your goal of 1 mile of pipe, you know, did you just spend money in the wrong place? That extra mile of pipe might have been money you should have spent somewhere else. So setting goals can really help you. And then involving all the staff in the program and asking for their input is another really good way to get those benefits, because oftentimes the staff who's in the field really have the eyes and ears of the utility, but they're not given the chance to input or make changes that occurs somewhere else or with somebody else. And it's really important to involve everybody in the asset management process. Asset management does require a change in how you think about your assets, and even a subtle change can lead to benefit. So even just making a slight change of just sort of questioning, you know, why do we do something, can lead to some benefits. So asset management does not have to be thought of as one big thing like this asset management plan or this asset management program. We can think of the collection of activities that make up your asset management program. And it's probably easier to look at the benefits of those individual pieces rather than looking at the program as a whole. So we're going to go through some examples of different utilities and some of the activities they've done under asset management to create benefit. So one of the things is when you do an inventory, you create a map and a robust inventory, you can really save time and money. So this is a small utility that really didn't know where all their, well, knew where their assets were only by people's heads, like just the fact that they'd worked there so long and they'd found them in the past. And they had a few like hand pictures that were as-built drawings that they could use, but they didn't have a robust inventory, and you can't remember every single part because some of them you haven't seen in a while. Nobody's memory is that great. So it could sometimes be a very time-consuming task to look for an asset. So they undertook an asset inventory process of doing GPS locations, making a good map, making an inventory of the different assets. And you can see on the screen kind of 3 different pieces that they were able to connect. So on the left is a base map that shows this hydrant. It links to a digital copy of the as-built drawing, and it also links to a picture of that asset. So now there's a GPS location, there's a picture, there's some other information about the asset, all right there. So now it's really easy to find the asset. You don't have to go looking for it. You can use the GPS coordinates to get there right away. So just to take a really very low estimate of how much time they might save based on the amount of time they spent looking for assets in the past, could be 200 hours a year on the very low end. I think it's probably much higher than that, with a labor savings of about $6,000. So it gives you a chance to think about what would you do with an extra 200 hours per year? What kind of activities might you want to undertake? The inventory also creates a social benefit for employees by creating a legacy. So as you're doing this inventory process, you're creating a legacy that you can leave to future operators who are going to come after you. So as you're retiring and moving on, others are coming up, you've left the legacy of all that you've learned, or as much as possible of what you learned, to the next generation of operator. It also allows you to share hard-earned experiences. So here's just a couple of examples of some assets where there was some information the current operator wanted to impart to the new or the person taking over for the system. So there were some video clips, just short video clips telling them about different things in the system. So that can save a lot of time and heartache later and provide a quieter retirement. And just as an example, the asset they're standing around right there took 12 hours to find because it was very hidden. Nobody really knew where it was, but now it's never going to take that 12 hours again, you know, like maybe 10 minutes at most. So it really can be quite a time savings. Here's another example of a meter inventory. This particular utility didn't think a meter inventory was necessary, like going in the field and actually inventorying them as part of that current state of the assets component of asset management. They felt because they had a billing system that listed all the meters that would be sufficient. But what they found out when you try to match up the billing system with the actual field work, they found out there was a restaurant that didn't have a meter at all. There were 208 meters that were not included in the billing system, and this is a system of several thousand. So that's a lot of meters, and at their average rate of usage, it's about $66,000 a year that they might be losing in revenue. So that's an estimate because we don't know exactly how much water these customers would use, but nevertheless, if you do this and you find out there's some meters not in the billing system, there's a chance to gain revenue into the system. Spare parts can be a huge expense, and they're often overlooked in a utility. So this particular utility has done a great job of organizing and cataloging all the spare parts, and on the shelf sitting there is about $300,000 worth of spare parts, so it's pretty significant. All the parts are organized. It shows what drawer, bin, etc. All the parts have pictures, they're cataloged in the inventory so they know exactly what they have, how many, where they are, etc. So they know there's definitely a savings from not having to look for parts. And I've been to many, many utilities across the country, and a typical spare parts inventory has parts everywhere, and somebody's, unless it's something you use often and know exactly where it is, oftentimes you don't know if you even have it, you don't know where it is, you're looking under boxes, they're difficult to find. So although they did not specifically quantify the time savings, it's easy to imagine based on discussions of what they did before and what they do now, that at least 100 to 200 hours per year for sure, and I think probably lots more, because now nobody has to take more than 5 minutes to go get any part, whereas some of those parts probably would have taken 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, who knows, even more. So there's a significant amount of savings there. There's also a savings from people not taking extra parts. So they were finding, especially on smaller parts or sensors, things like that, where they think, oh, something might go wrong if I take this out there, I better take 2 of them. And sometimes those parts, even though they were small, they were very expensive, and they would walk out the door and not come back. So they have stopped that process where people don't take extra parts. And the estimated savings is probably about 10 to 20% of the inventory, so maybe $30,000 to $60,000 a year, which is, again, very significant. And if we go beyond the spare parts that you would want to manage to things like nuts and bolts and PVC fittings and things of that nature, you're not going to manage those because they're very cheap parts. But they're also super important. If you don't have them, it can really slow down your repair process. So although we're not managing them, we want to have some access. So if you create a system where you're managing how many of each thing you need and making sure that you're always within the range of at least this many, no more than that many, then people don't have to take time out in their busy day to run to the supply store or the hardware store or something like that to get a part. And I know some small systems are in very remote rural areas, and if you don't have parts close by, that can be a significant time sink of running to get a part. This particular utility was about a half an hour to 45-minute round trip to go out and get a part. So if you're doing the repair and you got to take that time away, that really slows you down. We tried to find data that showed how many fewer trips we did now that they have this inventory process versus before. And what you find out is sometimes the data doesn't exist to do what you want. They can start collecting in the future, but we didn't have it right at the start. But we do know anecdotally there were hardly any trips that had to be made of an emergency type basis. So all of that time is savings, and it's also much more efficient if you can just sit down, do the job, and get it done rather than having to stop in the middle to get a part. There are also benefits related to planning and design. This is an example of a very small utility. And before asset management, their idea was that they needed to replace all their pipe. And their explanation was that it was old and it was breaking a lot. The cost of this project was $5 million. So the initial starting place was a map, hand-drawn, push pins. It was actually quite effective. It did show their whole system. But they didn't have very good data about what was actually happening in terms of pipe breaks and that sort of thing. So we worked with them to use some asset management thinking to, let's mine the data that you do have, see what the breaks, where they're occurring, get any information we can on why they're happening, how many we're having. And in that process, we found out that really they didn't have too many breaks. Their pipe was not problematic. They could really keep it going. They had a couple of issues they needed to address with some loop lines and a joint that was not properly restrained and some valves and that sort of thing. So the bottom line was they ended up doing a $50,000 project instead of a $5 million project. So they avoided costs of $4.95 million. And that has many social and environmental benefits. So environmental in that we didn't have to use any of those resources to actually put new pipe in the ground. We didn't have to dig up the roads and do all of that. So there were social benefits and environmental benefits related to that. And the customers don't have to pay back that big loan. So again, quite a few benefits to that project. Here's another one, a bigger utility that undertook a design and construction process where they decided to use 3D design and involve their operators very heavily in the design process, which is not something that always happens. Sometimes the design process happens over here and the operators are over there, and then never the two shall meet. Or if they meet, it's very late in the process, or it's very cursory. This situation involved the operators very heavily in the design and construction process, where they were being given a chance in a 3D world to kind of go through the plant. They were shown other plants in other places that had the same equipment and taught how to use it, so they had a lot of training up front. They had a lot of input. They fixed several problems that would have occurred had it gone forward exactly as designed. So in the process, they didn't have all the data they needed to completely monetize exactly how much money they saved. But they know that the change orders were minimized compared to other projects. The staff training was a lot easier. They had a lot fewer maintenance issues when they first started. So oftentimes in startup, there's some initial problems. They didn't have those problems. One quote that's kind of paraphrased from one of the individuals said that others are handed a system and told to make it work. We were involved the whole time and it was our system. So again, the social benefit of having workers who are very happy with the system and satisfied with how the process worked is a really good thing. In the future, they're going to collect more data so that they can actually monetize some of these savings, so that they can show their bosses and have support to continue this kind of approach going forward. Another concept in asset management is don't just fix it, improve it. So if it's something that happens over and over again, rather than doing the same thing over and over again, you try to change it so it doesn't happen anymore. So one example is this half horsepower pump, $1,500 purchase, $700 to $900 to rebuild. It was not really the right pump for the application. It really didn't have to pump very far at all. It was just sending water to a sample tap, a few feet away. So it was more than you needed. And so all this constant rebuilding and fixing this pump was kind of crazy. So eventually they said, we really don't want to keep doing that anymore. Let's do something different. So they got a pump that's a 1/16 of a horsepower, $250 new, no rebuild required. And now they can achieve the same purpose with, much less expense. Another example of don't just fix it, improve it is the chlorine scrubber they had. So this scrubber was a very messy job to clean it out. The employees didn't like it. It created this waste product that had to be disposed of. It was a really nasty job, not very safe. And at one point, after doing it for many, many years, they decided, it's time to think of another approach. So they retrofit the scrubber to have a dry, inert media instead of the wet scrubber that they started with. So we do have some costs in this case. We don't know the initial construction cost of the original unit, but we do know the O&M cost for a 10-year period of about $176,000. So roughly $20,000 a year. And then we have the cost of the retrofit, which is $101,000. We have the cost of the maintenance from 2013 to 2018 of $738. And then we estimated out a 10-year period trying to match the time frame of the initial O&M cost, and the cost would be about $1,267. The cost of the O&M unit per year is $20,000, and the new unit about $117,000. So the initial savings, including the retrofit, is $73,000 over the 11-year period, and the savings will grow over time at a rate of about $20,000 per year. So that's pretty significant change. It also has environmental benefits because we've changed from a wet, kind of nasty waste product to inert dry media, which is, better environmentally. And also has social benefits, especially for the employees, because they no longer have to deal with this messy job. It's something they really don't have to do much of anything with at all. So it's taken a task away from them. So it's really made their lives much better. This is a case where they changed a water-cooled screw compressor to an air-cooled one. Couple benefits here. One, the water-cooled compressor used water all the time, so maybe it wasn't tons of water, but it's this constant use of water. So if you change to an air-cooled unit, you don't have to waste that water. And it ended up being a little more energy efficient, so it has environmental benefits and some social benefits without being financially disadvantageous. Here's going back to our lubrication example, where this particular utility did change to a food-grade lubricant to reduce the number of lubrication changes. So prior to the change, they were using 54 gallons of lubricant a year, about 16 man-hours to do a complete change-out, and about $2,100. They went down to 1 lubrication change every few years. So in a year that they're not doing lubrication changes, they're only doing 9 samples to check the lubricant. They're not changing any gallons of lubrication, so that's an environmental benefit. Only 2 man-hours to pull, process, and ship the samples, so that's a social benefit for the employees. And a total cost of $520 versus $2,100, so there's a financial benefit. So this little project had social, environmental, and financial benefits, so all the whole triple bottom line. This is an example of using criticality to look at pipes. So here's pipe breaks for a long period of time for this utility, many years, all different pipe types, but it turns out most of the breaks, about half on steel and half on cast iron. So if the pipe fell out, half cast iron, half steel, that would probably be reasonable, but it turns out that's not how it goes. So the blue pipe is cast iron and the red pipe is steel. So roughly 5% was steel and about 50-ish% was cast iron. So the steel was causing a very outsized problem. They hadn't really changed the way of replacing steel up until they started their asset management program. Once they started their asset management program, they used a criticality approach where the most likely to fail pieces of pipe and the ones with the highest consequences would be replaced first. Making that change without investing more money in the whole overall process resulted in a 45% reduction in break rates and associated costs. So the 5-year cost avoidance was approximately $9 million. So just by changing the way that they did things without changing the amount of money invested in the small diameter pipe replacement program really helped them avoid quite a bit of money. With that extra time and money, they were able to address inoperable meters. So they reduced that from about 4,500 down to a few hundred. So that brought in extra revenue. And they were also able to start a valve exercising program, which will have social and financial benefits down the road. So here's another utility, a pipe example. How could they afford to replace all the pipe that they thought needed replacement? They had 16 miles of water main that they said were between 60 and 80 years old. The cost to replace was $24 million. What could they do? Because they didn't have $24 million to do it. So part of the problem was they were only doing pipe replacement based on age, and age is really not that great of an indicator of pipe condition, and by itself is not really a good way to tell if pipe needs to be replaced. So we needed some additional data, bringing in some asset management thinking to the process that wasn't really there before, to tell us more about the pipe. So we did have pipe types and sizes in most cases. We did have a fairly extensive database on breaks in terms of at least when and where breaks occurred, but no other details regarding like the type of break or why it happened or any of that kind of data. There's a little bit of limited soil condition data. We didn't end up really using that. We pretty much focused on the break data because that's what we had. So we worked to generate mapping and do a bunch of analysis of the break data. So we took kind of a variety of different ways of looking at, what was happening within the pipes. Were the breaks increasing, decreasing? Was the pace of breaks changing? What types of conditions might be affecting where breaks occurred? And the assessment was that only about 4.9 miles of pipe or less needed to be done over the next several years. And the or less is probably true. 4.9 was being fairly liberal with how many pieces of pipe we were going to be replacing. You could probably do a more restrictive approach and even do less, but even at that 4.9 miles, you reduce it from about 24 million to about 7 million for a savings of about $16.5 million, which is pretty huge. And the lower expenditure will most likely achieve a large part of the benefit for a fraction of the cost, because you're addressing those pipes that are really problematic. And and before we move on, they can also do an improvement in their data collection to make even better decisions in the future. And they may even want to invest in some pipe condition assessment as they get better at this, so they can even, again, make better decisions. This wastewater treatment plant was assessing the need for replacement based solely on age. Again, using age as kind of a proxy for when things needed to be replaced, and came up with about 75% of the utility needed to be replaced. They did not have the money to be able to do that. They were kind of in a quandary. We went back through the inventory using more operational judgment, asset management thinking, and we're able to show that maybe only about 10% or 15% at most of the utility was past its useful life. And most of that was just due to equipment that was no longer taken care of by the manufacturer, so obsolete equipment. So the manufacturer no longer supported the parts and that type of thing. So mostly that was why the equipment was past its useful life. If they were still supported by the manufacturer, it would have even been less. Some examples of setting goals and achieving benefits from that. So this utility setting a goal of reducing injury time. So they had a level service goal of, trying to reduce injury time, and included employee incentives to try to help. Really looked at what needs to happen if you're going to meet that goal. What do you have to do? So the real beauty of a goal is to go behind it. So what do I have to do to meet that goal? Maybe I have to do safety training, buy safety equipment, empower employees. So once you do all that, trying to get benefits, which you can imagine are tremendous, both social and financial, from reducing safety accidents. This is an example of reduced permit violations at a wastewater treatment plant from 17 in fiscal year 12 to 0 in fiscal year 18 by doing all kinds of things related to their asset management program, training operators, certifying them at higher levels, providing that type of thing, dealing with operation and maintenance, dealing with leadership, all of those types of things, upgrading standard operating procedures to really help decrease the amount of permit violations. And one of the things that asset management helps with is it allows you to think much longer term. Many of us get caught up in only thinking about what needs to happen in the next year or the next 5 years, but really we want to be thinking much, much longer. These facilities have to last for hundreds of years, and some of the pipe in the ground will be there for well over 100 years. I've seen some utilities that are approaching 150 years. So we have to think a whole lot longer. So this is a chart that shows a 100-year process of, what kind of the anticipated replacement of various components of the water and wastewater utility over a 100-year time horizon. One of the things that shows you is, where do I invest now? And is that enough money, like on an annual basis? What is the average investment on an annual basis, and what should it be if you look at the 100-year horizon? And this utility found out that they were about half what they needed to be. So they invested at about 41 million and they needed to be at 76 million. So they needed to have a program to ramp up their expenditures on capital projects to get up to about 76 million from the 41 million. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to involve your customers. You're going to have to do things to outreach to your customers to make sure that they're on board with what you're going to do. They tracked customer satisfaction and found out on a couple of different metrics that the satisfaction was getting better. The newspaper actually supported the rate increase and stated that, they really felt that the utility was in doing the right thing by investing. So once they saw that big long-term approach and everybody saw the need to invest, it was actually supported, which is a good thing, because then that can be a benefit of a revenue increase into the utility as you're doing those rate increases. So to wrap up, it's important to consider the triple bottom line of benefits, because doing so helps sustain the program, shows the public and elected leaders that investment in asset management is worth it, shows the employees that their efforts are succeeding, It's important to collect data to determine the benefits. We want to start before we implement our activities, not just rely on intuition that says, yeah, I think it's better, but try to find some numbers to actually show that, or ways to demonstrate that the benefit has occurred. You want to communicate the benefits to everybody, the public, your elected leaders, other employees. We also want to not forget about our non-monetary benefits, so the environmental and social things. They are very important as well. It's not always easy to put a dollar figure on those types of benefits, but you do want to describe them in qualitative terms. And achieving monetary benefits is about allowing you to spend the additional time or money on other important activities, not about cutting rates. So we're not doing this to say, well, we could charge our customers less, because there are all kinds of activities you're not getting to do because you don't have enough money. So what we're trying to do is improve in one area so that that money can be used in another area. So one of the examples I showed you was like that, where if you don't have to make all those pipe repairs, you can go do something else like fix stop meters or exercise valves. So it's really about, what are the activities you don't get to do right now that if you had some extra time or money that you would be able to go do. That's what we're after, is trying to help you get to those things. So you really want to think about the answer to the question of, what would I do if I had an extra $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? What would I do with that money? What would I do with the extra time? Where would I put it? Where's the place that I feel like is most needed? The data to monetize your benefits is not always easy to come by initially. You don't necessarily collect the data in that manner, but you should do this. It's really worth doing it, and you should think about ways of collecting that data and storing that data so it will help you in the future to make your case to your elected leaders. Because we really want support from elected leaders to continue to fund our asset management program and to continue to fund the water utility in general. They're not going to do that if they don't understand the benefits of the program. So it's super important to communicate to them what the benefits are so that they are supportive, and they'll want to do more and more and more. We also want support from customers, because we want them to understand that their money is being well spent and the utility is well operated. And also, if they're going to pay the rates, they're going to have to feel confident that you're spending the money well, and then they're going to be willing to pay those rates. We want more satisfied employees because we want them to stay at the utility. We want them to feel happy and see that there's a job path for them. And so we really want them to understand that the knowledge that they have makes a difference. It helps the community. So it's real important for those employees as well. And we do want to share the benefits widely. I did want to make mention that we have an asset management resource switchboard. It's hot off the presses. It's just been completed. We've tried to compile all the free asset management resources that we could find anywhere with EPA's help. They provided us a list of some resources that we didn't have. We had a bunch of resources. So this should be all free resources on asset management in 5 different categories, and you can click through and find all kinds of things. We're going to keep adding to these resources, and we also have a notice on our webpage. If you know of a resource that's not on here, we are glad to link to it. So please, if you find anything that doesn't exist on the switchboard, let us know and we will gladly add it. So in this particular case, there were some people who submitted questions prior to the webinar. Some of those questions we will reach out individually because they weren't really of general interest. They were very specific questions, or they didn't fit quite the context of this webinar. A few others I've included here, so we'll go through a couple of these and then hopefully have a little bit of time to see if there were any questions that came in during the webinar. There were several people who asked questions about how to convince decision makers and employees to do asset management. And I think what we talked about today is really the way to get at them, is looking at these benefits, like what are the potential benefits you hope to get? Really digging into that with your decision makers and your employees of, I'm designing a program to achieve these particular types of benefits, and then show in qualitative and quantitative terms whether you've actually met those benefits. because that's what they're going to want to be after. They're going to want to know that it actually made a difference, that it did some good. Another couple of folks asked about small systems. You know, could they really do this? Is there a minimum size? The answer is there is no minimum size. You can do asset management on your own. I use it all the time in my own personal life with my cars, my house. It is the type of thinking that I use every single day when I'm doing something. So it is a way of thinking, and there is no minimum size. Anybody can do it. And I do believe that a small system can measure their asset management benefits. And I've shown you some examples today. Some were bigger systems, some were medium-sized, some were small. But definitely small systems actually have, you know, a great potential for cost savings. So I would not shy away from a small system doing this. How are energy benefits of asset management measured? This is a topic that we cover in other webinars and such, and I would refer you to the efcnetwork.org website. Please go there. There's lots of resources related to energy. Energy benefits can be measured if you actually collect energy data before and after you make changes. You can see, you know, did the energy usage go down after you made changes? So please go to the EFC Network webpage and look up the energy information, because there's quite a bit of it there. Somebody asked about strategies for including source water protection and asset management. We actually did a webinar about that on June 27th. I did that particular one. You can find that webinar, the recording of it, on our efcnetwork.org webpage. If you have trouble, reach out to me, but there is, you know, that whole resource there. And we're also doing quite a bit of work right now to embed green and natural infrastructure into asset management. So stay tuned there. There will be more coming on this topic. Are we ready to take on asset management as we're updating financials, fixed asset schedules, GIS, work orders, inventory? And my answer is absolutely. This is the best time to do it, because you can build in asset management thinking right as you're doing these kinds of things. So if you want some help on how to get started, you know, please reach out to us. But yes, I believe this is exactly the right time to start asset management. You don't need to wait for anything as you're getting involved in these activities. You know, please build asset management thinking right into it. A question about asset management leads to performance metrics for field operations. What performance metrics apply to asset managers themselves? And what I think here is, this is kind of what we've been talking about the whole webinar, is the benefits piece is really how the asset managers can see if what they're doing is working. So what were the benefits you were hoping to get out of asset management, and did they actually occur? So the measurement of that is one really good way to tell whether the overall performance or the overall asset management worked. You know, was the performance better than it was before? So I would use some of this benefit stuff and the level of service goals as good ways to assess the overall practice and the asset managers themselves. Several questions revolved around asset inventory software, how to choose it, what to pick. That is not the subject we're here to talk about today. I just want to refer you, we have some resources on this, as well as some webinars on the EFC network, as well as the Switchboard. So please reach out to us further. There isn't one piece of software that I can recommend to anybody, because there's lots and lots of different softwares. If you want software, you will find the one you like. But you can start with just spreadsheets and that sort of thing, and then build up into something more robust. Someone asked about a type of template water utilities could follow to conduct preliminary assessments of their needs. We have the Asset Management IQ tool, which I think fits this purpose pretty nicely. So on the Southwest EFC website, as well as the Switchboard, you can get to this. You can either search for Southwest EFC, or you can, where you could go to Asset Management IQ, or this particular web link will also get you there. And as was mentioned, these slides will be posted after the webinar. The role of CMMS, which is a computerized maintenance management system with asset management, and integrating asset management and CMMS with GIS mapping. A few people putting questions related to this. I think it's super important to integrate GIS mapping if you have it. So this would be electronic mapping. If you have an asset management software, you want to integrate it as much as possible with the mapping. Mapping works well with your field assets, your pipe, hydrants, valves, that type of thing. Asset management systems often work better with vertical assets, but we want to integrate the two very much. If you want more information about this, again, contact us. We're happy to talk more about how to integrate those. How does asset management fit in sustainability? To me, it is the way to achieve sustainability. I think asset management is like a tool to get you to sustainability. That's kind of its purpose. So when somebody says, I want a sustainable utility, I don't see how you get there without doing some asset management things, because you need to think about the long term, the funding, the goals that you've set for yourself, how well you're doing that, the criticality. So to me, asset management is the way to achieve sustainability. And then the last question of this set is change management good to use with the deployment of asset management? Yes, it absolutely is. It does involve change. If you are a large enough utility to actually go through change management, yes, please do it. Smaller utilities are probably less likely to go down this route because it's a little bit more sophisticated than a small utility would do. But if you have that opportunity, it is good to do that because it gets people kind of ready for change. So Savannah, I'll go back to you and see if we had any questions come in during the webinar. We have just a couple minutes to maybe answer one or two of those.
Of course. And just quickly, before we jump into the Q&A, I have two last items for the attendees joining us today. The first is a quick poll question. The Environmental Finance Center Network does provide technical assistance for small water systems throughout the U.S. and territories. If you would like to learn about how we can maybe help you and get connected to experts on some of these topics, please let us know. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, in that chat box, I am sending out a link to the evaluation form and the switchboard that Heather discussed on the earlier slides. If you just can take a few moments to let us know your thoughts and any feedback of today's webinar, it will be very appreciated and beneficial. That switchboard link will also be available in the follow-up emails that you'll be receiving within the week. And on that note, Heather, we did receive a few questions, so I'll jump right in. The first question is, I guess it's more specific about specific technology that might be used for CMMS and GIS that a small system can use and potentially afford. And do you know any other platforms that allow operators to have discussions about what's working, what's not working?
Yeah, that's something that we're very interested in trying to help facilitate that discussion. I'm not sure the best way to make that happen, but I would love eventually for that switchboard to evolve into an opportunity for operators to start sharing what technologies are using and how. In terms of technologies for smaller utilities, there are starting to be a lot of free apps that are available on your phone or iPad or tablet, smartphone. So the technologies are getting more affordable. There certainly are some very expensive technologies that are out there, but there's also some at the lower end. There isn't like one technology that fits all because it really depends on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. So the best way is to go through and request for a proposal type process. And really dig into, you know, what are you trying to accomplish and how. You may be able to do a lot of what you're trying to do for a smaller system in a series of spreadsheets, or you might want to have some of these technologies. There are a few that are at the lower end that are a lot less expensive. So there are technologies out there that can address small systems needs. You will have to make some investment. It's not completely free. But there are some technologies out there. And then EPA does have the CUPS program, its checkup program for small systems. That one is free on their website. It has some limitations compared to commercial software, but that one is available for small systems as well.
Thanks, Heather. One more question for today's session. And for folks that did submit comments and questions that we're not able to get to today, we will be following up with you via email. So an attendee did ask that, so asset management can be used as a training tool for new operators, and how might, can you incorporate both of those?
Yes, and we have done that for several utilities where asset management is brought right into the initial training of a new employee, and I highly recommend that any new employee, like right away, get asset management training, because you want them to have that knowledge right away as soon as they get into the workforce. We're actually huge advocates of, it'd be great if people who were going through college or even like water quality trainings to become operators at community colleges or wherever, like that asset management got built into that curriculum. It's not there yet, but it would be great if people even had that mindset before they came in to work for a utility. So for sure, you want to have as much asset management training in your employees when they first start as possible, so that they're able to right away start being being a very productive member of your whole asset management team, where they can bring suggestions to you, they can tell you what's working, what's not. I mean, again, those field folks are your eyes and ears. They can really help you understand what's going on out in the field. They can help you understand what's being done and how it's being done and what changes need to be made. And so I think everybody should be really open to listening to everybody else. Communication is a really key part of asset management and getting benefits. So definitely incorporate asset management training to new employee training. So I think we're out of time with that. So I'll turn it back over to Savannah if there's any last minute things, but I appreciate everybody's attendance today, and thank you for being on, and wish you a good rest of.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you so much for providing your expertise for this presentation. Everyone have a great day, and everything will be posted to our website shortly.
And one more thing is, we have in 2 weeks we have an Ask the Expert webinar where one of my colleagues from New Zealand will be in town, and he will be answering questions along with me on asset management. So if you're not already signed up for that webinar, please do so. And again, that'll be like Tuesday the 20th, I believe.
Yeah, Tuesday the 21st.
Oh, 21st, sorry. So join us for that one. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Bye now.